Well, good morning and welcome again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is my twice weekly webcast, Elevenses. It's show number 225 on Wednesday, the 23rd of March, which actually makes it a 2-year anniversary edition. Got some interesting stuff for you again in today's show. So DocBike warns riders to take it easy at the weekend, but the weekend's crash toll is pretty grim. Where Dubai leads, should the UK follow? That's not something I would often suggest, but we'll have a look at how they are coping with delivery riders over there. We'll also have a look at Buell's new 2 bikes when quirky becomes, WTF, I think is the correct expression. Back before we'd forgotten it had actually gone is KTM's 790. And we'll finish off with today's discussion point, which is all about 2020's crash stats. They may not be cozy reading, but we can definitely learn from them. So stay tuned for the next 30 minutes or so while I take you through some topical news, some occasionally controversial views, and some better biking tips. Right, okay, so first thing to say really is that it's hard to believe that it's the 2-year anniversary edition of Elevenses, more or less. That's the link to the very first one, actually, up on YouTube at the moment. It's hard to believe that it was 2 years ago, pretty much to the day, that I launched Elevenses. It was also a beautiful Wednesday, much as it is today. It was mild and warm, as I remember, as COVID bit. And I explained that whilst we were being confined to barracks, I would do my best to keep people updated on what was still happening out in the biking world. And in the very first show, the stories I included covered the 6-month extension to MOTs, MAG's input on poor road surfaces and the implication for riders. And I coloured that with actually the story of a crash I had years ago caused by a bad road surface. I was looking at the Norton debacle. That's a story that's run over the last 2 years, with the Norton that was submitted to the Californian Environmental Protection Agency testing blowing up on their testbed, and also emerging stories of financial impropriety by the former owner, Stuart Garner, who had just resigned and handed the control of the company over to his wife. I also explained that I'd be offering some tips and tricks on riding, and one of the things I was covering was some weekly exercises to keep riders fit, ready to go back out on the bikes. So the link I've just put up on screen is actually that very first show. So if you want to go back and watch it, just for old time's sakes, there's the link. I have to say, I've probably got a little bit slicker. I've got intro and outro videos, but running it last night and having a quick look at it, it wasn't nearly so amateurish as I'd felt it had been at the time, but I still do need a bit of a better backdrop. I'll give you that one. Right, okay, so anyway, on with the first story of the day. DocBike, that's the Dorset charity that puts air ambulance critical care doctors and paramedics onto response motorcycles across the UK, is advising motorists to look out for motorcyclists this weekend. Now, studies, as I mentioned last time out, have shown that springtime is the most dangerous time for motorcycle collisions, with a peak in serious injuries and fatalities, seen as motorcyclists make their way back onto the roads after the winter break. Now, the DocBike article speculates that this may be because the motorcyclists themselves are a little bit rusty after a winter layoff, but also it's because road users may not be used to seeing bikes out on the road, or more likely a combination of both. Now, DocBike said that with sunny weather predicted in Dorset this weekend and many motorcyclists taking to the roads for the first time, DocBike was concerned that there could be a spike in motorcycle collisions. And Dr. Ian Mew, seen there sitting on the motorcycle. I've met him. He came along to one of our Biker Down presentations and was very complimentary about science of being seen, as it happens. He's the intensive care consultant with DocBike and also Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance. He says, to quote, "The human brain isn't designed to see small objects travelling towards it at speed, which puts motorcyclists at risk when other vehicles pull out unexpectedly in front of them at junction. If you combine this with other road users not being used to looking out for motorcyclists after the winter period, we can understand why this is such a dangerous time for motorcyclists. But it's not just about being not seen." Last year in Dorset, more motorcyclists were killed or critically injured due to losing control or whilst overtaking a line of traffic. On average, over 200 motorcycle collisions occur every year in Dorset, and last year, 17 of those collisions were either very serious or fatal. So that's Dr. Ian Mew, who is at the sharp end of motorcycle crashes with DocBike talking. And he went on to give some advice to drivers, basically to take more time to look for motorcyclists and give them more space, accepting this will be the first time many have ridden for a few months. And if you're a rider, basically they were saying take some time to check over the bike and take it easy, and accept your skill level won't be back to where it was at the end of last summer. Which is pretty much the advice that I mentioned was being given out by North Wales Police last weekend. Now, DocBike and Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance said they would be on duty throughout the weekend, and they signed off their article by hoping they wouldn't be needed. But sadly, if the Dorset and Somerset first responders weren't called out, others were. Here is the grim tally from the newsfeed on Monday morning. A 52-year-old woman died after a crash between a motorcycle and a car on the A16 in Lincolnshire. Police confirmed that the woman rider died at the scene. Sussex police are appealing for people to come forward who may have witnessed a collision involving two motorcycles near Polegate on the A22. That happened at a roundabout at Hailsham around 3:30 p.m. on Sunday, March the 20th. An investigation is underway after a teenage motorcyclist was killed in a crash outside a pub near Bolton. The 19-year-old was fatally injured after his bike hit a wall in the early hours of Saturday. There were reports of a crash involving motorcyclists on the main Wrexham Road on Saturday. An eyewitness said it looked like two motorbikes and two casualties. Ambulance and police were on the scene at 1:50. A motorcyclist was killed in a crash with two cars in Farnham Royal near Slough, which is just off one of my training routes as it happens. The rider of the motorcycle, a 29-year-old man, died of his injuries. His next of kin are aware and being supported by specialist officers. On Sunday in Manchester, a man was rushed to hospital with serious injuries after falling off his Yamaha MT-07 whilst riding with two others shortly before 10 a.m. Unfortunately, he died later from his injuries. And two other men had also already lost their lives after separate motorcycle crashes in Salford on Wednesday and Friday. Now, as it happens, I've just got hold of the 2020 casualty figures, so I'll be running through them to give you an insight onto how, where, and why we're all likely to crash this coming year. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that, stay tuned to the end of the show. It's not a grim topic, it's actually a learning opportunity, I would say that. All right, okay. Kevin says good morning. Good morning to you, Kevin. I'll just remind you, of course, that you can catch this show every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. If you don't get it on Facebook Live, you can head over to my YouTube channel and grab it there. Don't forget the all-important UK on the end of survival skills, though, or you will get somebody sharpening Boy Scouts with a horse's hoof or something silly like that. Right, okay, so yes, with that, it's also probably a good time to throw in a reminder of my training courses. So don't forget, the website address is survivalskills.co.uk. If you want to go direct to the booking form, and I'll just put a small shot of that up, there it is. If you want to go to the booking form, the direct link to that is here. Just fill in roughly what you're interested in. I don't need chapter and verse, but because I'll ask you some more questions once we get corresponding. If you just give me a rough idea of what you're after, I will get back to you with some options. So do head over to survivalskills.co.uk or follow the link there to the booking form direct. Right, okay, let's get rid of that picture and go on with the next story. Now, it's not often that I say that the UK could learn from what they do in the Middle East. With a view to rolling out similar measures here. But the authorities in Dubai are actually moving to tackle the growing number of serious bike crashes, involving food delivery riders. Now, pretty much as you would expect, it's the same as happened here. The bike delivery businesses actually flourished during the COVID-19 lockdown. As the pandemic resulted in a sharp spike in online orders for delivery of food and groceries, medicine, and other goods too. And perhaps it's not entirely surprising then that crashes involving delivery riders have actually soared. Now, the figures from Dubai are these. They've gone up 25% from 300 accidents in 2020 to 400 accidents in 2021. Actually, that's not 25%, is it? Somebody can't do their mathematics in the story. That's actually 1/3, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it's gone up by 1/3, hasn't it? So anyway, according to the authorities, casualties have been attributed to riders failing to leave safe distances, suddenly swerving, and jumping red traffic signals. So the Roads and Transport Authority and police agencies have announced the launch of a large-scale joint campaign to educate motorcycle riders about the risks of speeding and ignoring traffic rules. Now, a spokesman for the RTA said, "We're keen to streamline the business of the delivery sector to ensure its growth in an environment that caters to safety and security concerns." Now, police stressed that traffic awareness for delivery riders is crucial, and so the Traffic and Patrols Department has launched several awareness campaigns for motorcyclists, specifically aimed at those working in the restaurant and commercial companies, delivery agencies, in other words. Now, one of the concerns is that most of the riders who actually work in these in the food delivery industry in Dubai actually come from Asia or Africa, and they are said not to have appropriate knowledge of the UAE's traffic rules and safety. The campaigns are therefore centered around spreading a culture of traffic safety. And the statement said, "We're keen to streamline the business of the delivery sector to ensure its growth in an environment that caters to safety and security concerns. We're also keen on improving the traffic safety level of motorbike riders and road users and serving the interests of all stakeholders." I hate that word, stakeholders. It's obviously common everywhere you go now. Anyway, a new delivery activity manual has been issued by the RTA, and that sets out the requirements for licensing and the drivers themselves. It details required training. It details how they should go ahead and get the necessary paperwork. It lays out specifications for delivery boxes and driver uniforms, presumably so other people can recognize them. It lays out requirements for contracting with delivery companies in line with top international standards and specifications. Now, the introduction of these measures aims, it says, to ensure compliance with the high standards of safety and quality and to reduce traffic accidents and improve the level of services. Now, in association with what are described as training institutes, the Transport Authority has actually launched education courses. And these cover traffic laws, maps of the roads of Dubai so they can find their way around, and how to react during accident situations. And the delivery companies are being required to enroll their employees on these courses. Other measures taken include the introduction of specifications for protective gear for those riders, which includes body protection, headwear, and safety footwear, all matching international standards and specifications. And finally, the Delivery Service Excellence Award is being launched to reward the best performing companies and drivers. Now, the first category covers the best two companies in the delivery service and the best two companies in the delivery service with smart platforms and apps. Maybe not so much of interest, but the second category is actually dedicated to rewarding the most professional riders, and the top 10 riders will actually be honoured each year. So the award is aimed to create a competitive environment between delivery companies to prompt them in turn to improve customer service, uh, cus- the quality of the service, and to motivate the riders themselves to abide by the traffic regulations and the company's own policies. Now, not too surprisingly, the awareness campaigns will run alongside licensing and enforcement activities, although there were no details. The report did say that the licensing um, of delivery riders would be made more stringent, and what were termed enhanced traffic law enforcement measures were being aimed at delivery riders to, quote, curb malpractices, unquote, in the belief that stricter penalties will reduce bike related traffic accidents. And one of the interventions they're actually taking is to confiscate vehicles, and the police have deployed patrols which have seized 108 vehicles from riders who've failed to obey with to traffic laws. The aim there is not only to save the other road users from the riders, but protect the riders from themselves, basically. Interestingly, the press report actually did attempt to gain some insight into the pressures that the delivery riders themselves are under as they race against time. And one rider says that he uses GPS to navigate, but the app's not always accurate. So sometimes he has to call customers on the move while he's riding to get delivery instructions from them, and he accepts that that is risky. Another rider from the same food company claimed he had no choice but to speed as customers get upset and yell at him for delivering meals late. And of course, he also said that reaching the location fast would give more time to deliver as many possible orders per day to make more money. And that really, I think, sums up the whole problem with the fast food delivery industry. We, as the consumer, expect fast food to be delivered for almost nothing, and so almost nothing is what the delivery riders earn. I think that really does need a turnaround. But I think it's interesting that Dubai is taking some serious steps there. Meanwhile, the situation here is virtually unregulated here in the UK. It's like a wild west out there. I had to take some serious evasive action to avoid a delivery rider just yesterday in the car. Right, okay, so where were we? Don't forget, if you have any comments, any questions, any feedback on the show at all, I'm always happy to hear it. If there's anything you'd like me to cover in a future show, I'm always happy to think about that too. I have asked regularly this. I think I got one suggestion, which I did cover about a year and a half ago. But yeah, drop me a line if there's anything you'd like me to work on. I'm happy to do that. Now, okay, on to some motorcycles. You probably are aware of the Buell motorcycles. I've always had a sneaking regard for Eric Buell because he's always been keen to break the rule book when it comes to bike design. Bikes with fuel in the frame, brakes attached to the rim, the shock absorber on the rear that worked in tension rather than compression. He was always doing something different. Now, although Buell actually launched his first bikes in the late 80s, I first came across him a little bit more personally because he was actually a contributor to the online motorcycle forum that I was a member of from about 1994 into the early 2000s. And he was always interested in what people thought about the bikes, and he listened to feedback from people. Now, Buell bought a minority stake a majority stake, that's right, in Harley. So start again. Harley bought a majority stake in Buell in the late 90s. And that basically put an end to his public appearances on the forum. He wasn't allowed to anymore. And whilst the initial products looked promising, the financial crisis of the noughties actually, plus disagreements in the way that Buell should move forward generally, led to Eric actually moving on. And Harley Davidson shut the brand down, but retained the name. Now, Eric Buell actually bounced back, first as Eric Buell Racing. That was a short-lived venture before it folded. An assets company bought up what was left, and that became EBR, who attempted to go racing in the AMA series in the US, where the twins not only proved pretty unreliable, as I recall, but were totally outclassed as well, unfortunately. But last November, things took a step forward again because Eric Buell actually bought back the brand name from Harley 12 years after the V-twin producer had pulled the plug on them, and he restarted production of a series of quirky road bikes. Now, the first to roll off the production line was the 1190 RX Hammerhead, which, not to put too fine a point on it, wasn't much of a looker. But earlier this month, Buell Motorcycles unveiled two more prototype machines, and they've been put before the global market at the 2022 Daytona Bike Week. And here's the first of them. This is the 1190 DR Baja. DR stands for Dune Racer. Now, as you can see, if it's if a 1200cc V twin can be said to have a conventional dirt bike design, that's what it's got. The 1175 horsepower, so I'll start again, the 175 horsepower engine actually makes it the world's fastest production dirt bike, according to the press blurb. What's next? Well, the second bike that came out of the press release at Daytona was a Super Touring 1190, and that's said to be powered by the same 1190 V-twin engine taken from the sports bike model. And it's in a, again, slightly detuned form, but it still pumps out 185 horsepower, puts out 137 Newton meters of torque too. Now, Buell says that makes the bike the most powerful touring motorcycle. It certainly tops things like KTM's already mega powerful 1290 Super Adventure by around 25 horsepower. Puts out a few more horsepower than BMW's six-cylinder 1600 GT. And the Hayabusa, arguably a sports tourer, that does pip the Buell by a couple of ponies. If you know any other contenders for hyper tourers like that, drop me a line. I'd be interested to know whether Buell's claims stand up. Here, though, is the bad news. My mouse has just packed up, which is rather irritating. So there we go. Let's just try and get that up. Unfortunately, I do have a touch screen. There we go. That is the Tourer. It's well, what can I say about it? I mean, the styling, if I can use that term, it really just beggars belief. Okay, the back end of it is fairly conventional Buell. The middle bit is fairly conventional Buell, but I mean, have a look at the front end there. You've got those strange sort of shields on the side, but it's that sort of screen that I just can't get my head around that. I mean, what is that all about? It's just ghastly, sort of like a squared off surround with that sort of almost vertical plastic piece in front of it. I mean, I can only say that it looks like something that's been knocked up by a couple of 14-year-olds in their garden shed and sort of stuck on the front of their bicycle with the aid of a hammer and some tin snips. I mean, you wouldn't really think that this is actually the product of a motorcycle design team. You'd think they'd be intent on producing something that has some sales appeal, and frankly, that just doesn't have it, does it? It's fairly ghastly looking, I think. I've gone to the wrong picture altogether. Right, okay, so there have been some pretty ugly bikes over the years, but if you can think of anything uglier than that Buell, I will be interested to hear it. I mean, some of the motorcycles put out by the electric bike designers they've been going out of their way to produce bikes that the average motorcyclist wouldn't be seen dead on. But they are, doing it for a reason. They're attempting to differentiate their product from the internal combustion engine. But, with Buell heading off or facing off basically against every other petrol engine bike manufacturer in the world, it really is an odd choice to see them make such ugly looking motorcycles. There are only so many bikes you can sell on quirky looks and brand loyalty, and frankly, with the prices for that machine at around $21,995 for the base model, that's around £17,000. I honestly can't see that being a bike that's going to sell in any number. That's due to go into production next year. Right. Okay. So don't forget, if you enjoy the show, you can head over to my coffee channel and support me over there. I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on in the show. But for the moment, let's remind ourselves of another motorcycle. Now, last time out, I was talking about the CG125 and how it's actually been in production now for almost 50 years in one part of the world or another. Now, one motorcycle which is back almost before it's been forgotten is this one. Now, it wasn't too long ago that I was remarking on how the 790 KTM engine had actually been replaced in KTM's lineup by a new 890cc motor. And the 790, the old engine, was off to power a range of bikes built by the Chinese manufacturer CF Moto. Now, of course, to meet the latest emissions standard, Euro 5, the engine had to be updated for those CF Moto machines to sell in Europe. But there I thought things would rest with the 790 powering those Chinese bikes. But it seems not, because bizarrely, the news broke midweek last week that the 790 Duke had officially been relaunched internationally. And it should be in showrooms by June. So the big question really is why? And what's this all about? Why is a bike that was cut from the lineup so recently actually back in production? Why did it have such a short production run in the first place? The 790 was replaced by the 890, as I said, and there is also an under development 990. Now, it may be that when KTM withdrew both the 690 single Duke and this relatively short-lived 790, it left KTM with a big hole at the budget end of their bigger bike range, because it's a long way down from the 890 to the 390 machines that are on sale. And whilst the 890 may be more powerful than, it struggles to compete on price with the MT09 and the Street Triple. And if you think about what Triumph have done, they've brought in the 660 Triple, which seems to be selling pretty well. Now, there's one other factor, of course. The revised machine will be shipped to Europe in a power limited 95 horsepower format. Now, what does that mean? Well, it actually means that they can now legally restrict it because you can cut the power in half, basically, legally, and sell it as an A2 friendly motorcycle for the bike test. Now, the rest of the world still gets the slightly more powerful 105 horsepower motor, but that legally limited Euro version will bring a new market to KTM because the 113 horsepower 890 is too powerful to go for the A2 license. So the performance, frankly, anyway, should be enough to keep most people happy, 95 horsepower. And many people reading around the KTM forums, it does seem that many of the owners actually did prefer the LC8 engine 790 over the 890 that replaced it. The motor is said to be tuned for torque, incidentally, with 64 pounds-feet, making it easy to ride at low revs. So bringing back this 790 may not be such a daft idea. The motor is actually young enough for it to have a full complement of electronics. It gets traction control, which is cornering enabled. You get cornering ABS. You get a supermoto mode, whatever that is, a anti-wheelie control, 3 standard ride modes, and you get your now standard TFT display in color. Where the bike does save a bit of money is non-adjustable white power suspension at both ends, and an extensive options list. Now that covers both way quick shifter, anti-engine lock control, presumably that's for downshifting. You get adjustable throttle maps, you get 9-stage traction control, you get track mode, you get cruise control, you get a tire pressure monitoring system, you get phone and music connectivity too, but those are all in the add-on pack. Now that means that the base model can hopefully be kept to the sharp price point. The tech pack is actually 700 quid, which, considering it's mostly the electronic tweaks, I think is a silly price, but hey ho. The other thing that strikes me is that the KTM could actually source the motor from China. That would actually make sense. Previously, KTM have made a fairly big thing about all their motors being built in Austria, but this may be the first model to take an engine from outside Europe. Um, so at a time when new bike costs are being they're rising pretty steeply at the moment. Of course, we have rising fuel prices, there's cost of living squeeze, so a more budget approach does make plenty of sense. One source suggests under £7,000. That would allow it to compete with the Chinese bikes pretty much head on, although another more credible does actually suggest a €9,000 price tag, but it still undercuts the 890 base model, which is around €12,000 in most European countries. So maybe the 890 will be the bike that vanishes and be replaced by the 990. But whatever the answer, it does strike me as fairly weird marketing. But one thing that did grab my eye, you can have a color other than eye-watering orange. There's something about those KTMs in orange that actually I really don't like. So there is a rather nice looking, understated grey and black version. I still think a half-faired bike would be a top seller though, for those who don't actually want the flies in the teeth experience. Right, okay. On to the final bit of today's show. As I mentioned, I have got hold of the 2020 casualty figures, and bearing in mind what I covered as we started off the show by talking about the accidents that have actually happened in the last few days, it's worth looking through the figures to try to get an insight as to what goes on out there and why we fall off. Now, the good news is that in the long term, crash stats have been improving. They peaked just after the Second World War, and they've pretty much been steadily coming down ever since. And even since 2004, when almost 600 riders died on the roads in a year, the fatality rate has almost halved, and serious injuries have dropped by around 48% too. Okay, there is one proviso to that, because bike traffic also declined in this period by 22%. But even so, even when you factor in the reduced mileage, you're still looking at a fairly significant gain in terms of road safety. But in blunt terms, if you look at the period from 2015 to 2020, what you see is that 6 motorcyclists died on average each week. That's roughly speaking one a day, isn't it? And around 115 were seriously injured each week in reported crashes. Now, here's something else to think about. 2020 was actually, of course, it was lockdown year, and that was a year when car traffic declined significantly too. Now, bike traffic went down, as I said, by 22%. But why is it that when there were many fewer vehicles on the roads for extended periods of the year, why didn't the crashes drop significantly? You know, they're pretty much the same in terms of the mileage. In fact, if anything, they've gone up slightly. You would, as I say, the outward impression that you get with the fall is 15% from 336 fatalities in 2019 to 285 last year. But as I said, traffic dropped by around 18%, from just under 3 billion miles to under 2.5 billion miles. So in fact, things stayed the same or actually got slightly worse. So let's have a quick look at the graph over a period of time. There it is. Now, this is taken from the DFT report. It's a little bit difficult to read the caption on that, so I'll just zoom in on it if I possibly can without my mouse working properly. I can't get that to zoom at the moment. No, okay, I'll have to leave it where it is. But basically, the flat line there is the fatality rate, and what you can see is that it's basically flatlined for the last few years. There have been a sort of fairly steady decline in serious injuries and minor injuries, on which could be attributed to improved helmets and improved clothing. Actually, the adoption of body armor, for example, would be one possibility. Um, but if you look at the orange line, which is the minor injuries, they have gone up in the last period, the last year or two. So it's interesting to ask why that is. I've just talked about delivery bikes, so maybe there is a connection. Now, who actually gets killed in bike crashes? Well, again, here we go. The interesting thing here, of course, is that the pale green is male riders, the darker green are female riders. So as you can see, male riders on bikes overwhelmingly outnumber fatalities of female riders on bikes. 92%, in fact, of the casualties seriously injured or killed were male. Um, the other interesting thing to look at, and this is something that has changed in the last 20 odd years, is the actual spread of age groups. And what you'll see is that, in fact, many riders now are being killed in much older age groups. It used to be down this end of the scale, the younger end, the sort of the teenagers and into the 20s up to sort of 30-ish. But now, significantly older people are being killed. Is that because of the aging demographic of motorcyclists? Is it because riders have been returning at even older ages than they were to get back onto bikes, and those are the ones at risk? Again, don't really know. I don't see people actually investigating that and telling us the answers to that one. So there's lots we still need to know about that. Now, the next slide actually explains one of the misconceptions that we have about who causes crashes. Now, let me again try and see if I can zoom in on that. Um, if you look, what you get is the number of crashes involving the collision partner, as it's known. So 445 crashes there involved no other vehicle. There were a few collisions between cycles, a few more with other motorcycles, and then overwhelmingly, the biggest number there on the chart is cars. And what that means is that we tend to come to the conclusion that other people, specifically car drivers, cause crashes. Um, but that's not actually true. Most motorcycle crashes are actually self-inflicted, and that's what Ian Mew actually said in the piece I started with, actually, if you remember, where he talked about cornering and overtaking being significant um, activities which resulted in rider deaths and serious injuries. And we can bear that one out. We can show how that is actually correct, because all we have to do is look at where um, collisions happened. And if you look at the numbers here, they tell you where they happened at junctions. And if you look down here, you'll see not at junctions within 20 meters, and you'll see 57.6% of the fatalities didn't happen anywhere near a junction. So have a think about that really for a moment. That is a fairly significant number of riders who basically are not being killed at junctions, which is where riders tend to blame things. Now, okay, so why were so many cars involved in collisions when we're seeing collisions happening away from junctions? Well, the answer is that yes, there are collisions at junctions, and some of those are on the faster roads, the rural roads, and they are often caused when the rider comes around the corner too quickly to react to an emerging vehicle, and the bike arrives too soon for the emerging driver to do anything about the collision either. But many of the crashes that kill riders do involve other vehicles when you overtake. Many are head-on collisions. Others involve overtaking vehicles that are either turning themselves or emerging from a junction that the rider overtook towards. And of course, many of the cornering crashes, this again is something we tend to be unaware of, many of the cornering crashes are also collisions with cars coming the other way. Many riders assume that when they hear about a car and a bike colliding on a corner, that it was the car driver cutting the turn. That's simply not the case. It's almost always the motorcycle that's run over the centre line into oncoming traffic. So understand where crashes happen. We actually really do need to get our heads around that particular piece of information. And have a look at this one. Now, this is contributory factors. I clipped out what those are all about. And I just took some of these as a sample. The biggest reason given as a contributory factor to all crashes is actually didn't look properly, and that applies to rider and biker alike. You should know from Science of Being Seen now why it is that riders don't see motorcycles. It's not because they didn't look properly, which unfortunately is what the Stats 19 form continues to say. It's long overdue for an update on that one. There are solid physiological reasons to do with the way the eye is constructed and we see things, and there are the psychological, the process of actually interpreting the visual data, what actually filters its way through to our consciousness. It isn't like a camera and the film operating, and we really have to get our heads around that and understand that. And of course, that's always assuming the bike can be seen, which is never guaranteed. So here's the rider errors that put bikers in the firing line. Exceeding the speed limit. Look at the numbers. The 2,255, that's the bikers that were exceeding the speed limit in the collision. Look at the other column, the grey number, 190. It's just hidden under my logo there, 190 something. That is the number of car drivers who were said to be exceeding the speed limit during a collision. So it's overwhelmingly 10 to 1 the biker who was exceeding the speed limit. Look at the loss of control. Again, 2,204 bike lost control, 154 driver lost control. Once again, it's enormously outnumbered bikers falling off and cars losing control and hitting a bike. Traveling too fast for the conditions. Once again, 10 to 1, it's the rider who's making the error. Inexperienced or learner driver. Rider, well, again, there are slightly more motorcycles, slightly more riders, slightly more drivers involved at this time. The figure is sort of 300 roughly to 1,500, so a higher proportion of collisions caused by inexperienced drivers, but overwhelmingly it is still the rider's inexperience that is causing the problem. Following too close. Now, again, motorcyclists tend to blame drivers who are tailgating them. I've lost count of how many times I hear people complain about that. But look at the figures. Again, it's 5 to 1 pretty much in favor of riders being too close behind car drivers, not the other way around. Sudden braking. All right, this one is a slightly closer split. This one is about 2 to 1 against the riders. But, if you look at those figures, what can you conclude? It's the riders themselves putting themselves in the firing line there and not the drivers. And the other factor is that exceeding the speed limit, I will say, is that even when you look at urban SMIDSy collisions where the driver did make the mistake, it is very often the rider over the limit who actually gets killed in those collisions. That is a major, major risk factor when you are riding in an urban area. I'm no fan of speed limit campaigns that simply say dumb things like slower is safer. But the evidence is that riders who tend to ignore the limits tend to ignore them in all the wrong places. Right, so pretty much time to round off today. So I'm just going to do a little bit of trumpet blowing. I don't often do this, but I will today. The first thing I'll say is where can you go and get this kind of information? Well, I would say this is why survival schools exist. Ever since I have been involved in rider training, what I've been trying to do is educate riders about not just riding better, but in fact riding more wisely. You don't have to slow down to be safe, but you do have to slow down in the right places. So do remember, I do my talks and presentations. The April one is actually Science of Being Seen again. That will cover all the topics that you've come to know and love about science of being seen, visual perception errors, the issues of the motorcycle conspicuity, and the proactive elements that we can apply to our riding to make ourselves a little bit safer. That goes out on Wednesday, the 6th of April. So just a couple of weeks ago, come along and support me there. £5 for a ticket. Everything that you give me on that, basically, I worked hard to plough that back in to improving the presentation for next time. So that's something to think about in just a couple of weeks. Do come over and support me on that. As I say, as a rule, I don't do too much self-promotion, but I will just share some feedback from Helen I got the other day. She said, your posts are fabulous. I read them all, enjoying it, sharing it far and wide where it's free content, of course, marveling at how on earth you managed to turn out such much material. Well, the answer is really basically that motorcycling is the gift that keeps giving. Barely a day goes by without me thinking about something I can write about with my various columns. So Facebook, they go out live. Coffee, they go out live. Do come over there. If you do support me over there, you get a link to all the back catalogue. There's an awful lot of stuff over there as well. And don't forget the YouTube channel as well, which is also available to you. Right, that's pretty much it for the day. I've got a couple of people who've looked in. Nick said hello. Clara said sneaked in from work. Well done, Claire. Kevin says the Dubai scheme sounds good. UK needs to step up, particularly London. Couldn't agree more with that, Kevin. That's the delivery rider scheme I was talking about. Kevin also says that the Super Tour looks like it was designed and crafted by blind staff working in a dark alley. Yes, a horrible thing, I think. That whether they'll sell is anybody's guess. Right, okay, so that is pretty much it for the day. Do not, as I say, don't forget Science of Being Seen is coming up in a couple of weeks. Do come over there if you possibly can, and don't forget, if you want to support me for these shows, do head over to my Ko-fi page. I will put the link up just to remind you in case you've forgotten. I bet you haven't, but hey ho. So 2 years on, we're still doing these ELEVENSES shows, and I hope that 2 years on you're still finding them entertaining, informative, and, as I say, thought-provoking. That's usually the aim of what I do in the better biking bit at the end. So I've overrun again. I didn't mean it to take that long. This was a new topic, actually. I completely rewrote half the show to cover this first thing this morning. I was up at 7 doing it. So I hope you enjoyed it. Do look back in for the next show, which will be, of course, on Sunday. Anything else to say? No, I don't think so. So if you have enjoyed the show, thank you very much. If you're out there on the road, as somebody is who's just gone past the door with a very loud exhaust pipe, do ride safe out there. That's it for today. Thank you very much indeed for your time.